Good evening. Welcome to the Historic Review Board work session for July 22nd, 2025. We can call for roll call.
Board Member Edgar.
Here.
Board Member Fulkerson.
Here.
Board Member Lawrence.
Here.
Chair Powell.
Here. Okay. We'll be talking this evening about recent housing legislation by Carrie Richter. And we
Yep,
have
so
staff
tonight I've asked Ms. Richter to come. As many of you know, there's been a flurry of legislative action this spring on a couple of bills that affect housing, and then also, as a byproduct, do affect the Historic Review Board. So I've asked Carrie to come here to kind of provide an overview. Some items are kind of directly related to the work the board does and might impact compatible change project moving forward. And some items are not as impactful, but I think it's important to get kind of the overview of everything that came through. So I think Ms. Richter has a presentation, and then just what we can watch the timing, but if you have specific questions, you can ask Carrie, and at some point you can wait till the end, or if you have it at the certain slide, you can ask her. So I'm going to hand it over to Carrie Richter, our city attorney.
Okay, thank you. Carrie.
Thank
Good
you,
evening.
Chair Powell, HRB members. I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm just gonna, I think I have about 9 slides. I'm gonna give you go to the next slide. I'm gonna go, the purpose of this presentation is to give you all and the public an idea of the land use related legislation that came out of the 2025 session. This isn't comprehensive. These are the bills that I think are most applicable to the city from a land use context, as well as to the HRB. And I'm going to try to focus on the things that I think may be of issue to you. I've given a list of the bills, but rather than run through them right now, I'm going to just start in. Next slide. First, I want to give you an update on the status of Senate Bill 1537, the mandatory adjustment provisions. You'll remember from the 2024 session, there's a piece of legislation that requires cities to give mandatory adjustments on certain things, certain design and development standards. And the legislation allows local governments to seek an exemption from the obligation of providing a mandatory adjustment. The city did file that exemption request to the HAPO, which stands for Housing Accountability and Production Office, which is in Salem. They are processing Oregon City's exemption request right now. And we expect that there will be a decision in this fall. That decision could be, we are approved, Oregon City is approved, which means that the city does not have to grant any of the adjustments, mandatory adjustments called for in the legislation. HAPO could say that the city is approved in part, meaning that there are certain adjustments that the city does not have to grant, but there are some that the city does have to grant, or HAPO could deny the request. I don't think we have a sense right now of where that's going to go, but we're optimistic that we have put together a comprehensive application and it will be approved. Next slide. So the first piece of legislation from the 2025 session I want to talk about is Senate Bill 974. And Senate Bill 974 does a couple of things, but most importantly for HRB is a design standard preemption. And this is similar to the mandatory adjustment in that it exempts development from complying with certain standards. And so cities have to waive, quote, standards intended to preserve the desired character, architectural expression, decoration, or aesthetic quality of new homes, including standards regulating, and then there's a list of things. And one of the things that's important to know about Senate Bill 974 is that it passed very late in the session, and there were not very many hearings about the language. So there's some confusion about the scope of this, and I quoted this because I wanted you to see there are some people who say that cities have to waive all standards that preserve architectural expression. because it says in standards intended to do that. And then it says including standards regulating, and it says roofs and windows and things like that. Is it just the list of specific items, or is it anything regulating aesthetic expression? I don't know the answer. We had a lunch meeting of land use lawyers last week when it was 95 degrees in a Chinese restaurant, and it got really heated with people going back and forth arguing about what it could possibly mean. And I'm not sure if it was the temperature or the interest, but it got pretty, we don't know. We don't know what some of these things mean, but we know that this does apply to historic preservation related aesthetic objectives. What is important is that it applies to certain development proposals, not all of them. It applies to development proposals of more than 20 single-family or middle housing units separately standing, so that probably won't affect HRB, right? Because this is going to be out in the greenfield development on the edges of the city where you're going to have 20 or more lots. Where it might affect is it applies to it doesn't apply to multifamily development with more than 3 housing units inside. So this is a multifamily structure. So if you've got a structure with 5 multifamily units, the design standards still apply. Cottage homes, if you had more than 20 cottage homes, then they would be exempt. You'd have to have 20.
You have to have 20.
You have to have 20.
How about 3?
3 design standards still apply. But the magic number here is 2. If you have a multifamily structure with 2 units, or more importantly, a mixed-use structure with 2 units, design standards would not apply. So in a commercial zone, if you had a mixed-use project that had 2 units in it, design standards won't apply. It specifically does not exempt setbacks and building heights, and it takes effect on September 26th. So if you go to the next slide, I have attempted to take the list. This is super small. I have attempted to take the list that is in the statute and applied the design guidelines that I think would be waived in the event that we had 20 plus cottage cluster, a 20 plus unit cottage cluster, or we had a 2 unit mixed use project. So facade materials, colors, and patterns. So anything related to that would have to be waived. So things like horizontal board siding, earth tones in the bungalow category, wood or masonry, stucco, concrete, plaster in the commercial category. Roof decoration forms or materials. So gable or cross gable of not less than 8 to 12 pitch, 9 to 12 pitch, those sorts of things would be waived. Doors or garages. We have a standard that says no white doors or windows. Window materials and window elements. 1/1 double hung, multi-pane in the upper sash. I mean, the point I'm trying to make here is that the categories don't fit our design guidelines very squarely. And so and when you're reviewing an application for compatibility, it's a constellation of things. It's not a discrete list of, check the box. So I think if it comes to that, I think it's going to be harder than we think just to decide what comes out and what stays in. Because, for example, architectural details is on this list, but architectural style is not. Massing is not on this list.
Patio doors, could somebody put a slider in?
Oh, Paul, you need to turn your,
Yeah, could somebody put a slider door in, a patio door?
the standard with respect to patios is, it says the requirement for patios or decks. It doesn't say doors.
But that is an architectural detail.
Well, the architectural details examples in this are ornaments, railings, cornices, and columns.
Right, I
Okay.
think like the trim of the
Trim,
door
yeah.
would be a detail and the door would be a feature.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of words that you could use for it. Am I understanding it correctly? Sorry if I'm late to the uptick on this, and I know we've discussed this before, but, so it's applicable to 20 single-family units
Or middle housing units.
or middle housing units, but not the existing ones, only if a proposal comes through like to make like a sweeping, to apply a sweeping change or something to 20 units collectively?
If you're building 20 new units.
Okay. Okay.
So, there's not a lot of infill opportunities, but not saying that there couldn't be. I think that, the bread and butter what the board works on is, single-family infill, detached, duplexes, triplexes. We're in the small
Right.
middle housing infill, so that is not affected by SP. But if there are residential units involved on 7th Street with a commercial building, then this would definitely be brought in. And
Okay,
I think
yeah.
we would call Carrie up and Missy and
Okay, and
take a
that's-
look at what they're proposing, and hopefully we have a little space and time, that we've,
That's the multifamily
Yeah.
with more than 3 units
Yeah.
component? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. All right, thank you.
So this is the first legislation, I think, that is a sort of frontal attack on historic design compatibility that there is no exception for this. This automatically expires in 2033. So we have 8 years of trying to sort this out. As I mentioned, it doesn't apply to setbacks and it doesn't apply to building height. And again, there's no reference to massing. So I think, I think it doesn't apply to massing. I think we still have control over massing. Moving on, Senate Bill 974 has some other provisions that aren't related to design review. It alters the procedures and standards for post-entitlement review. So once you get your land use approval, you have to go through a series of steps in order to get your building permits. And Senate Bill 974 creates a process that's similar to land use review, where you file your building permit and you get a completeness check. And then once you get your completeness check, the city has 120 days to issue your building permits. And this applies not just to building permits, but public works permits and all the things you need, all the permits you need after you get your land use review approval. And then the bill places some fairly significant limits on how the city can process what's called expedited land divisions, which is a particular type of land use review that is usually applied in the subdivision context, and makes some specific requirements that we can only provide notice to property owners within 100 feet, and creates a 14-day comment period, and then broadens the scope of when this type of process applies. This most similar process that the city has is type 2. So if you're familiar with a type 2 review where you have notice and it goes out and you have a 14-day comment period, so that process is going to apply to a zone change where there's not more dense development. So if it's a zone change that is contemplated by the comprehensive plan, we're gonna have a type 2 review. This won't affect you, it would never have come to you anyway, but these are decisions that probably under our current code are type 3s, would go to the planning commission, are now gonna be type 2s. A variance and a planned unit development, those are all gonna be type 2s with a staff decision and an appeal to city commission. So we're mandated to change our procedure, so those decisions won't go to the planning commission anymore. Next slide. Okay, House Bill 2138 is the governor's middle housing encouragement bill. It seems every session we have a bill from the governor related to middle housing, and this session was no exception. This bill is only about 45 pages, which is small compared to the other ones, but they're sort of a disparate collection of a bunch of policies intended to encourage middle housing. The first big component part is there's no traffic study or off-site exactions for middle housing developments of 12 or fewer middle housing units. I've highlighted the two that I thought might come up for you or might be relevant to historic preservation. First, where an accessible or affordable middle housing unit is proposed within a duplex or a triplex, the city has to allow one additional unit, creating a triplex or a fourplex. So if it's an affordable housing project or a handicapped accessible project, an applicant can get one more unit. And then the second one relates to single room occupancies. Are you all familiar with what a single room occupancy is? That's where you have sort of it's a dorm essentially, where you have rooms that are lockable with shared kitchens and bathrooms. And single room occupancies have been something that the governor has really supported, and over the last few sessions we must allow single room occupancies. And it seems to me that where single room occupancies could be very helpful would be in commercial historic buildings if you were going to convert them. And the important part about this provision is that in multifamily zones that allow 5 or more units, you get a whole bunch of additional density for single room occupancies. And there's no parking requirements. So if I know that single room occupancies aren't popular as a housing type, but theoretically I could see on main streets where they might be. Another part of House Bill 2138 that I think may get a lot of press is that it voids all recorded covenant provisions that prohibit middle housing. And we've had that on the books prospectively for the last couple of years, but this one is retroactive as well. So those covenants are going to be no longer valid as of January 2027. Tree removal codes related to housing have to be clear and objective. And middle housing land divisions have to be processed within 63 days with no notice other than to the applicant. Next slide. The final important part about 2138 is that it mandates LCDC to implement rulemaking on a whole slew of things. So we're going to have a whole bunch of new rules that are going to come out of LCDC as a result of this bill. Eliminating siting and design standards that prevent or discourage manufactured or prefabricated housing. We're going to get a definition to, quote, unreasonable cost and delay, which is a provision in the affordable housing statutes that has been there forever, and we've never had a definition to know what that meant. Incentivizing cottage clusters and defining the qualification for small footprint or floor areas. Since I know cottage clusters are popular in historic districts, I think there may be something that might come out that would affect some of our districts. Amending the siting and design parameters for middle housing types. Amending the permissible discretionary criteria available on the alternative track. You know, we've talked about maybe that under the needed housing statutes, you have to provide a clear and objective track, and then there's a discretionary alternative track, and they're going to do some rulemaking about the degree to which cities can exercise that discretion in the alternative track, I expect. And then they're going to they're going to set forth a model system development charge for residential development types. Questions about those? Okay. House Bill 2258 is kind of an interesting one. It's interesting to me anyway. Whether it has any historic preservation impacts, I don't know. But the idea is that LCDC is going to put together some rules that mandate certain developments. So theoretically, a development between 50, on a property larger than 1,500 square feet and smaller than 20,000 square feet, vacant and not located on steep slopes, LCDC could say, here is a model subdivision. And it is X number of lots, and it's oriented like this, and local governments, if you get an application for this template subdivision, you must approve it. And that template will preempt or result in whatever zoning not applying. So theoretically, this 10-lot subdivision on a 20,000 square foot lot could go in a historic district without recognizing any of the historic protections that would otherwise apply. So I'm not saying that that's the rulemaking that's going to come out of this. I'm just saying it's possible because the only prohibitions on this are lot size and steep slopes. So if it's on a flat lot, theoretically, I mean, I don't know what's going to come out of this template idea, but the idea is that LCDC is going to come up with these sort of standard development templates, and then applicants will be able to use them without regard to whatever local standards may otherwise apply. Next slide. On the positive side, we are getting some additional help on infrastructure financing. House Bill 3031 creates an infrastructure financing program with $10 million in funding to be used for grants, loans, or forgivable loans for transportation, water, wastewater infrastructure necessary to accommodate housing. Qualifications require at least 17 dwelling units per net residential acre, and forgivable loans are only available for very low income, moderate income affordable housing. So it's a start. And then the final slide that I had for you tonight was House Bill 3190. And this is special assessment for commercial property designated on the National Register of Historic Places. You all probably know that the special assessment program expired a couple of years ago in its totality. It used to apply to both commercial and residential, and that expired. And so what this does is it reinstates the commercial component of special assessment for a National Register designation. It applies to office, retail, single-family, multifamily residential, and units within mixed-use building when used for rental property that is not owner-occupied, but it otherwise does not apply to residential.
Is there a reason that that they didn't want it to apply to residential? The proponents of the bill were Restore Oregon, and Restore Oregon has had lots of conversations with many stakeholders in an effort to reinstate the full bill, to reinstate the whole enchilada. There just isn't support for the residential component because it's not seen as a economic generator. And there's been some testimony that special assessment is not as good an incentive for homeowners as a grant or a tax credit would be, because it doesn't actually put money in your pocket. It doesn't help you improve things. So I have worked a lot. I am the Policy Advocacy Committee Chair for Restore Oregon. And so me personally, I'd advocate for it. I've been advocating for a tax credit. So can you use this in addition to a tax credit, historic tax credit?
If we had a tax credit, you could, but we don't. Oregon is one of the few states in the nation that doesn't have a tax credit.
You can still do the federal one, though,
Yes,
right?
you can.
Okay. So you could do 10%, you could theoretically get 30% still if the
For
property
commercial.
applies.
For
Yeah.
commercial.
Okay.
So that's a positive thing, and, you know, the Main Street program is still going really strong, and this really feeds into that, and the idea, you'll remember that last session, there was a bill that mandated allowing internal conversion of commercial buildings to residential, and so this kind of supports and buttresses that effort. And if we could get, you know, the second floors of every commercial building on a Main Street to be residential, that could be, or single room occupancies even, that could be really great for historic preservation as well as for housing. So that's the last slide I have. It's kind of a lot, and it's all over the place. I'm sorry, it's such a mush, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about any of those bills or anything else regarding the legislative session that you've heard about or want to talk about.
I had a question. Last time we met, we talked about, you mentioned that they were going to have some discussion about demolition.
Mm-hmm.
Did that go any further?
You did not.
Good.
Yes, about 500 people submitted testimony. It was part of the governor's House Bill 2138, and about 500 people submitted written testimony. It was a great showing from the preservation community, and it was removed from the bill.
Great. That will be beneficial. For
Would
sure.
getting property designated as a historic, national historic recognition, would that then allow somebody to have grants or some funds to restore something? I'm thinking of different properties that would be like in Kenema, we're in the historic district, but they're not on the National Registry individually.
So this special assessment bill, House Bill 3190, only applies to commercial property, so housing that is rented.
So we have commercial properties along McLaughlin.
Mm-hmm.
They could then apply.
Mm-hmm. They could. They have to adopt a program for preservation. They have to submit they call it a preservation plan.
I think the first step is you have to be a contributing resource in the National Register District
Yes.
or listed individually. So a commercial property along McLaughlin is identified as a contributing resource. You meet the first checkbox. The second checkbox, I think what Carrie says, you say you have to have a plan for your structure in hand that has qualified rehab. And as long as you meet that threshold, then you have your assessment is reduced. So you have to be coming in and proposing a rehab. What you can't do is do the rehab and come back at the end and ask for that because they won't approve it. They need to be approving it with your proposal.
But they don't have to have National Registry designation.
They have to be considered a contributing resource in Kenema. So we can look up their structure, and if they're
Okay.
a contributing resource in a National Register District,
Right.
which is just Kenema, they could potentially take advantage of that. We'd have to look up the specific of the building. But I think what I always let property owners know is you have to be coming in before you do your work. You
Right.
can't come in afterwards.
And it has to be in the commercial strip,
It has to be an income generating property.
okay?
Sometimes it inspires people to get listed on the, I mean, in
That's
my
the
experience.
idea.
Yeah.
To get listed on the National Register, because maybe if they haven't before, then someone informs them that there's a tax credit or there's some sort of program that, incentivizes that listing. But so it might be a kit and caboodle situation where they get listed and they go through this process, but yeah, usually someone's assigned to like looking at the process the whole way to make sure that you're meeting the standards and not destroying the integrity.
The special assessment is great, but it's not, it's not the thing that, saves your project. It's that, you're getting the couch cushion of money and it's just a piece of your, pro forma.
The total cost of ownership.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to have, I think the way it works is it assesses your property at its dilapidated state, and then as you fix it up, and then it doesn't, the assessor doesn't assess it at the higher value. So in order for that delta to be significant, your structure has to be in pretty rough shape.
Right.
In order to make that
Worth it.
Right,
worth
yeah.
it. And even when I say worth it, that's kind of very little in the cost of what it costs to rehabilitate a building.
Right.
Right, and with a 3% cap on assessment, you know, in the 80s, when people's assessment was just going up and up and up, and like 9 and 10% a year, that tax-free, I mean, you're basically you're freezing your assessment for 15 years, that adds up. Now it's a little bit less, so it's just a piece of your performance, but it's important, you know, every dollar counts.
Right.
I just seem to have a concern with the waiving of so much of what we use as design standards will open the Pandora's box to just stuff that we wouldn't have, I might categorize as unacceptable.
Well, it seems that every session we're sort of holding the floodgates, right? We're trying to hold our program together, right? Every session we're holding our program together, and what is coming out of Salem are regulations that aren't even directed to us specifically. They don't. It's, you know, square peg, round hole, right? They don't fit us. They're directed to siting and design review on outside of historic districts. And so they don't really acknowledge the compatibility objectives that we're trying to retain. And so it is my personal belief that until we come with a proposal that shows the ability to get second floors used or something, we're going to continually be just standing there going, wait. And I don't know how many years we can do that. I mean, I hope, we've been pretty successful so far, but that's the struggle.
Yeah. You know, historic preservation, I think, has recently, in the last couple of years, there's been a class argument put on it, which is absolutely incorrect. Naturally occurring affordable housing happens in historic districts, and Oregon City is a #1 example of that. And so getting that communication tool out and getting ahead of that conversation, as Carrie was saying, I think is really important. And that's this side, longer goal. I think on our end for the Senate Bill 974, it goes active in September. So it was 90 days after the 91 or 90 days after the end of the session. Normally they give you a time period and you work to change your code.
And you get to talk to your other fellow cities about how they're doing it, and there's opportunity to vet it amongst the city attorneys and...
So we are going to be applying it directly. I mean, every city is, because we can't. And we also don't know what is coming up next. So having a legislative file every year is, we just don't know what the next one is. So we are going to be applying that, what we say, we apply it directly. And so we'll have a website up that talks about it, and we'll probably have we'll have a process identified for applicants who want to request it, and we'll all put our heads together and see what other cities are doing. But starting that September 30th, we will have to directly apply it. Even if our code says one thing, we will apply that piece. But I think, for all the work that the board has done for compatible change, luckily, I think with the 20 units has been really helpful, because our conversation to the city commission and the community is, where we started and where our recommendation. I don't think the Senate bill changes. I don't think there has to be an amendment to, how the recommendation will be given to the city commission next month. We just have to know that out there may be, I guess, an infill project with 20 or more units, which I can't think there would be one, but there may be one.
Yeah.
And then I think the commercial mixed use. So those things are out there. I think we just have to kind of put them over there, and if and when they ever happen, we will address it. But I don't really see a need to change the HRB's recommendation to the city commission at this time for compatible change.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it applies much to Oregon City. But in my head, I'm thinking about Portland. I'm thinking about, these other places that just have more historic neighborhoods and the potential for things like that to, sneak in.
I see a lot of pressure on you, Christie, over the whole planning group, trying to be the front line to protecting the interests.
I mean, in some sense, we are given clear direction and our goal, it's very technical. We're going to be technically implementing as requested by applicants and as directed by, our legal staff. And, a lot of this, some of the back end changes, like some of the the changes to process are not going to really affect us because we kind of already do that, like the timeline for approvals and how we look at, improvements to middle housing, not, off-site. We rarely do that. So like, there's a fair amount that, is kind of standard work for us. So it's not a big deal. I think this 974 is a big change because it's where the mandatory adjustments, we're saying, it's not that we won't give the adjustment requested, but they need to go through our process and get the variance or do the modification and just work through our existing code. And that's what we're asking for the mandatory adjustments. This is basically just directly applying. So we're going to have to figure out those categories and look at our code and what is, for single family house garage standards, what part of 974 is removed, what part stays. So we're doing our own audit with just like our single family, non-historic design standards.
Who is on the HAPO organization, the HAPO committee? Is that a group of, who's involved in that?
HAPO is a arm of LCDC. And it was created a couple of sessions ago, I think in House Bill 2001. Is that the right number? Anyway, its job is to catalog and evaluate how jurisdictions are doing in their housing production. So their job is to be the number crunchers about how many units are being created, what kind of units are being created, and to sort of monitor to make sure that every city is producing housing units consistent with its population growth. Their job also is enforcement. So you can file, a developer can file a complaint with HAPO that a city is obstructing or not following the laws with respect to a particular development or just in a practice. And HAPO has the enforcement authority to work with the city to get enforcement. And so they are sort of all things housing. They got a big chunk of money from the legislature this session to continue their work. And so there are, I think there are about 8 to 10 HAPO employees in Salem that work under the LCDC umbrella. And their job is accountability and production.
So implementing the policy.
Well, they're implementing 1573, but they're implementing the larger housing, evaluation. We've had goal 10, and goal 10 said we had to, build as many housing units as our housing needs analysis showed. But there was no sort of overarching body that was evaluating the speed at which local governments were producing that housing and how much that housing cost and those sorts of things. And so this body's job is to do that.
Thank you.
Do we ever communicate with Kelly Reed, who is?
We do. Kelly is our DLC, so the Department of Land Use, Department of Land Conservation and Development. So if LCDC is up here, with DLCD and HAPO, they're kind of here. So our previous Historic Review Board planner it now works for the Department of Land Conservation Development, and actually her region involves Oregon City. So we talk to Kelly on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, but she is working with more than just housing. So HAPO has a very specific role where DLCD works with cities on all the issues, that are coming through.
Great. Any more questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to adjourn this work session, and we will come back with the HRB meeting at 7.